This is the next in the Patriot Minute series. I'm Grandpa Rick. I want to tell you a story about the scout dog and why we need, in this day and age, to beware the scout dog. In 1988, I was assigned to the U.S. Embassy in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan in the Middle East. And in the words of the political pundit Dennis Miller, smack dab in the middle of the craziest cul-de-sac on earth. It was a heady time. I was working 7 days a week, sometimes 24 hours a day. But occasionally, I'd get an afternoon off so I could take my wife and our 3 daughters, who were young at the time, to see some of the ancient sites. And wow, does Jordan have ancient sites. Outside the city of Amman, there was a Greco-Roman village, an ancient village, or what was left of it, which long ago was a busy place at the time of Christ. This entire region was part of what was called the 10 cities of the Decapolis, which also included Philadelphia, which is a modern Amman, Jordan, and Damascus, Syria to the north. Cities mostly found just east of the Jordan River Valley. Tens of thousands of people lived here back then. Semite peoples and Jews and Arabs, and also Greeks and Romans. It was a fertile region, located along a major trading route, a caravan route, in fact. These were probably fairly wealthy towns and cities at the time, receiving trade from all over the world. However, at this time when we went at this place, not much remained above ground to see, just a dust-covered mound of scattered stones and broken down walls, as you can see from these pictures, and thousands of strewn pottery shards embedding the earth. But 2,000 years ago, the town had been something to see. It was located on a majestic hill overlooking a fertile valley on 3 sides, amid scattered trees and grassy fields rolling off in the distance. Before us was a crumbling, dirt-covered mound of ruins, erased from the family of mankind for some long-forgotten reason, and as silent as death itself. We pulled up on the dirt road that day, which snaked over the top of the mound, overlooking the valley to the south and the forested area to the southwest. I stopped the car, stepped out, and told my wife and daughters to wait just a moment. Of course, as kids are, the girls were excited to get out and explore. At that time, they were between the ages of 5 and 11 and seemed to have taken well to Middle East life since we'd arrived in the region several years earlier. But I insisted that they sit quietly a moment. I stood out there by the car listening, studying the forested hillside that dropped away to the east, then the scattered trees to the southwest. I spied the broken slope to the south amid the buried and open tombs, the catacombs, tucked into the excavation mounds of scattered stone, dirt, and debris, where centuries of nameless grave robbers had done their work well. I listened, sniffing the air, searching for any evidence of possible trouble. Happily, there were no threatening sounds that day, just the gusting wind that seemed to blow continually in this mysterious, ancient land. The Middle East can be the safest, most welcoming place on earth. The people, truly gems of humanity. Usually. But in a whisper, things can turn unpleasant, more so than any place that I've lived, from Asia to Africa to Latin America and to America's hopeless, forgotten Indian reservations. And like anywhere, it's a place you have to know and learn from. A land to love, but more so, respect. That day, however, everything appeared fine, so I told the ladies to go at it. They jumped from the car with boundless energy and began poking around. Soon each had collected a handful of shattered pottery pieces, each one a bit different, but all personalized and interesting. Some with strange markings, all in a line, some with glazed, colorful surfaces, like ceramics. In fact, some were probably the remains of shattered ceramic tiles rather than pottery, tiles from a Roman bathhouse, perhaps. Shards with images honoring Zeus, or Dushara, or other Roman or Nabatean gods. The girls found a few unique pebbles and picked a few wildflowers that crowned the hilltop in bunches. Soon each girl was scattered in several directions, having a great time exploring, but no longer close to the protection of the car. The main reason I wanted to take my family to this site was to take them down underground into the many burial chambers or catacombs to see and experience what most tourists never do. Such tombs, common among the ancient Middle Eastern Greek and Roman villages and villagers, were carved out of solid rock, and some of these tombs still lay hidden beneath the ground, trying their best to stand against the ravages of time and men. Each Roman or Greek family that had any wealth at all would have their own family burial vault. Some of these chambers went quite deep in the ground, in fact. Each appeared to have a passageway entering into an underground room or an antechamber that held from 5 to 10 or more burial slots carved into the room's walls, fanning out in 3 directions from the central underground chamber. In fact, you can tell from these photos that the ancient tomb chiseler was right-handed, with chisel marks going down and to the left. Each burial slot was maybe 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet high and wide, and perhaps 5 or 6 feet deep, cut horizontally back into the virgin stone. The deceased was anointed with oils and spices and then wrapped in linen, and then slipped back into these individual cubbies or slots. Presumably, family members would open the stone doorway and enter the antechamber and periodically inspect how the dead were making out, making sure everything was undisturbed. The deceased were often buried with jewelry and Roman coins, so of course that was all the excuse the multitude of grave robbers over the centuries have needed to go in and unearth these burials. But as far as I could tell, in those open chambers, the dead had been long ago plundered. All that remained were the empty burial chambers themselves, with some bits of bone and linen wrappings scattered about. Of course, we did not try to dig up or open any tombs that were still sealed and unopened. That would be illegal and highly unethical, of course. But that day I didn't get the chance to show my family, for as I called the girls to me, as well as my wife, and as I walked towards the sloping burial hill, I got a glimpse of it out the corner of my eye. The scout dog, the spotter. The land of Jordan anciently had many packs of wild dogs. Bears, fierce wild boars, even lions that would attack any creature they thought they could take down, including humans, and the smaller the better, which always made women and children the easier targets. And while the bears and lions are gone today, long since hunted into oblivion, the boars are not, at least in certain wilder areas, particularly in the Jordan Valley. But generally, they are shy of humans and smart enough to stay out of sight during daylight hours. But what was still roaming the land, though of a mongrel feral mix, were packs of hungry wild dogs. Like the massive wolf packs of old that once roamed all over North America, these were highly intelligent and sporting keen senses, including eyesight that can spot if a man is armed, if he's carrying a rifle, even from a distance. Each pack had a leader, an alpha male, that enforced his rule with swift brutality. The other males and the females were subordinate. They hunted as a team, disciplined, efficient. I stood still, watching what I recognized was a well-disciplined and focused canine. Though an obvious mongrel, it was about the size of a German shepherd, though it had a nasty, lean, currish look about him. The dog was the scout, the spotter. I could tell right away, for it was not moving towards us, but it was assessing its target, watching my girls with keen interest, eyes shifting from them back to me, undoubtedly trying to decide if I had a weapon. Then, as fast as it appeared, it was gone. I ran with my wife by my side towards our girls, shouting for them to get in the car now. And as I feared, they didn't want to. They expected to stay several fun hours, and suddenly Dad was changing the plans. Fortunately, since we'd come to this land, I'd convinced them that when I use a certain tone of voice, they respond. Unfortunately, our youngest daughter was not hearing me. I ran to the last place I'd seen her, behind a juniper tree. There, down the hill, about 50 feet, she was walking towards me, slowly, unconcerned, and seemed to be enjoying the day. I sprinted to her and scooped her up and turned back up the hill. As I trotted, movement from the corner of my eye stopped me in my tracks. Just beyond the forested hillside, perhaps 200 yards distant, and coming fast, was a pack of wild dogs numbering perhaps 24. This was a large pack, in fact, the biggest that I'd ever seen, and it was in full gallop towards us. My wife called to me, standing by the car. I yelled back to get inside with the girls. It was going to be tight. I picked up speed. The daughter in my arms had suddenly gone, completely silent, hugging my neck, I think sensing that something was wrong. We reached the car just as the pack rolled over the crown of the hill about 100 feet from us. I opened the driver's side door, tossed my daughter in, and rolled into the seat just as the first growling cur reached my open door. I yanked it closed right in his surprised face, I think. The pack swarmed around the car, was sniffing and eyeing us inside. The girls all watched wide-eyed. I'd seen wild dogs in the region before, but always out in the bush, away from civilization, and not in such killing numbers. Arabs generally view dogs as unclean, like pigs, as taught by the precepts of Islam, and would usually shoot them on sight, especially these wild packs. So these highly intelligent creatures, with their excellent senses, could spot whether a human was a threat, whether they were carrying a rifle. I think they figured that day that they had an easy meal of tender tourists there on that lonely hilltop in the outback of Jordan. I knew that attacks from these wild packs at the time happened occasionally, and though the local government always covered up such tragic happenings and often attributed any injuries or deaths that might be reported to, quote, accidents, but always the government would bury the gruesome details, as you can imagine. There are a number of accounts of these that you can read about online. And though I was carrying a concealed pistol, and if necessary, I'd have used it, the thing that stuck with me these many years, however, was that initial scout dog, the pack spotter. How he had so deliberately picked us out, sized us up, and then snuck off to bring in his team. By themselves, alone, such hunters are pathetic, mangy, starving whelps. Alone they keep their distance, but in large numbers, like piranhas, that's a different story. And tragically, too much like what we see in our inner cities and in our struggling nation and in our world today. The scout dog appeared not much different than a friend of mine's German Shepherd. A bit mangy to be sure, lean and sleek and built for speed, but not something people would find threatening by itself. But what was important in that setting was what the spotter represented. And to the untrained eye, the danger could easily be missed until it was too late. The scout was, in essence, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that's the point, really. Today we have an army of such people, wolves in disguise as loving, generous, harmless sheep who claim to only want social justice. In truth, this danger has been building for some time. The Fabian socialists of Great Britain even presented themselves openly in their official logo as a wolf in sheep's clothing, a killer wolf blatantly disguised as a harmless lamb. Knowing what these long-established, arrogant elites want, even proclaiming openly in their speeches and writings, I find it amazing that more Americans still refuse to see the growing danger. In fact, we've been missing it for years. It's been coming upon us progressively, of course, as they've planned. The Fabian socialists, still very much alive today, were some of the first supporters of eugenics, the official killing of the unwanted in society, including minority races, by providing abortion and sterilization services for the poor and marginal. The same supposed science promoted by early progressives like Margaret Sanger, George Bernard Shaw, and Oliver Wendell Holmes. In truth, Margaret Sanger and her fellow American eugenicists and their publications were a source of inspiration for the Nazi Party's brutal racial policies of the 1930s, yet another historical fact buried by the secular progressive left of America today. The possibility of this truth becoming widely known scares them nigh unto death, which it would. It would become widely known if not for a compliant, often incompetent media, backed by a long since bought off and corrupted academia. Quote, Margaret Sanger, "The most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it." She was the founder of Planned Parenthood. Especially today, these people walk among us arrogantly, with impunity, and must think us fools. They are fiercely anti-Christian. They even mock, without apology, the scriptural warning of grievous wolves who appear in sheep's clothing. They thumb their noses at that image by embracing it, in fact. For heaven's sake, as I alluded to earlier, at one time the Fabian Socialists stole that image as their official logo and representation to the world. This is that logo we have here, presented here. Notice the sheep is dead and skinned, and the wolf has deadly teeth that he intends to use. These egotistical socialists were up to no good, and they were proud of it. Today's socialists, or more accurately, cultural Marxists, have taken over a major political party in America, proclaiming collectivist concepts unapologetically and smugly to our faces, as if people are so stupid or so brainwashed that they can't see where all this will end up. In the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, he called for the forcible overthrow of all social institutions and religious entities. Marx had a passionate hatred for Christianity and for the family and for private property. He raged against these ancient institutions upon which all prosperous civilizations were built, including ours. One modern historian, commenting on the single goal of communism, the abolition of private property, said that this would require the official murder of upwards of 100 million Americans to accomplish this goal. The unencumbered ownership of private property is a foundational right of a free society, an unalienable right guaranteed by God, in fact. For that reason, it is canonized in our sacred Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Also for that reason, most Americans would fight to the death anyone attempting to steal that right from them. My friends, today more than ever, we must teach our children what is happening in our schools and our universities, in corporate America, in Hollywood, in social media, all of it. It's infiltrated. They have infiltrated all our institutions. Their scouts, their spotters are literally everywhere in the Democratic Party and even among many Republicans. Washington, D.C., the swamp, is awash with them. Social media tech companies are controlled by them, as are many large corporate entities. We need to teach our children, our families, to spot these curs, these desolators who, as the biblical hireling Christ warned us about, care nothing for the flock. In truth, they seek the controlling, the scattering, and the devouring of God's children on earth. That is their goal, as long as weakening and corrupting our youth further empowers them. And of course, it has been. We must confidently and openly identify and expose these scouts to our children, especially when going off to college or participating as interns in government and corporate programs, before it's too late, before we lose an entire generation of young Americans. These wolves in sheep's clothing are laughing at us as complacent deplorables. They see us as the perfect soft targets, and they talk about this all the time. Believe me, once they've stolen absolute power, they won't give us a second chance. For so-called democratic socialists, it's always one man, one vote, one time. God bless you, my friends, and protect you from this evil. My beloved grandchildren, my neighbors, all of you, and all fellow Americans. And please remember, as Grandpa Rick always warns, keep a sharp eye. Thank you.